From e-bikes to scooters, from dock to dockless, cities and riders now have a wide variety of choices when it comes to how people get around town. Maybe you've tried some of these services, maybe you rely on them, or maybe you think you'll never ride one, but either way, these mobility services are here to stay, and cities are just now integrating them into their transportation ecosystems. However, the conversation around the safety of these micromobility devices has all but devolved into a fistfight between the elected officials that love them and the ones that hate them. Some are out to protect the sidewalk for pedestrians, some are eager for the tax revenue that these services can provide, but most are thinking about the big picture of what it is we can do about it. And while everyone has their pros and cons, we think there's another conversation that's buried underneath this debate that isn't getting the attention or the scrutiny that it deserves. There's a huge part of the equation that's being ignored when we talk about safety and mobility, and that is the overwhelmingly more dangerous, prevalent, and deadly issue of how cars interact with the rest of us, specifically scooter riders, cyclists, and pedestrians. For example, the pandemic reduced the amount of cars on the road dramatically throughout 2020, enough in fact to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by 6.4%. But what did fewer cars on the road mean when it comes to safety? Well, that's where the conversation takes a turn for the worse. You see, in 2020, even though there were less cars on the road, pedestrian deaths rose by 20% in just the first 6 months of 2020 alone. Why? Well, as it turns out, the only thing stopping drivers from using the road as their personal speedway was all that pesky traffic in the way. Because without it, there was nothing in place to ensure that drivers wouldn't speed recklessly, and that's contributed to an historic rise in pedestrian and cyclist deaths in the past year. Just a few weeks ago, 4 cyclists were hit on the MacArthur Causeway, and this has basically become a regular occurrence throughout the county. It's interesting that in lieu of actual traffic calming and safe multimodal street design, Miami's traffic congestion, which has consistently been on the top priorities list of things elected officials want to solve for decades, has in fact been actively saving lives this entire time. Because without it, our streets have demonstrably become too fast and too furious for anyone not in a car to be able to use them safely. Which brings me to the actual meat of the conversation that has successfully been hiding behind all of the constant bickering pedestrians, cyclists, and scooter riders have been stuck in for years, which is this fight over who gets to claim the tiny sliver of space that we've been granted on the sidewalks. This piece of space that is completely segregated from the vast majority of public travel space that we have dedicated to cars and have designed solely for the purpose of allowing these cars to move as fast and freely as possible. Whenever we talk about safety and mobility and we want to point the finger at pedestrians or scooter riders or cyclists or skateboarders or whoever else is forced to share these sidewalks, let's remember what the deadliest mode of transportation is year after year: cars. And all it would really take to fix any inconvenience that may arise from having people choose greener transportation is simple infrastructure. Things like examining how we deal with parking to implementing dedicated protected bike lanes or maybe even extending the sidewalk a bit. The point is, nobody here is trying to trip your grandmother, but if we dedicate the majority of our space to cars, not only is grandma going to have to dodge scooters, grandma isn't going to be safe crossing the street either. The more space we dedicate to cars, the more infrastructure we design with the intention to allow cars to move as fast and freely as possible, and the more time and attention we spend pointing the finger at everyone else as we fight over who gets priority over the sidewalk, the deadlier our streets become. So, for the last time, before we fix our lips to complain about safety and make micromobility the enemy, let's take a sincere look at how we can make public spaces safer for everyone, starting with the biggest threat there is in terms of mobility: single occupancy vehicles.